Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. It helps out the show a ton. And you can follow us on Instagram.
Enjoy.
How's that?
You look huge. You look massive.
Good,
Yeah.
good, good. Just the right amount of coronary heart,
Yeah.
issues.
Hold your breath for like 5 seconds. Valsalva as hard as you can, you know?
Turn purple, turn purple.
Yeah. That's what our audience expects. Purple men,
Oh yeah, yeah.
you know? Welcome to the Red Gauge Podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Kyle. This is Josh. And joined again, part two, the esteemed Max Aita.
Thank you.
Just wasn't
Thank you
long
for
enough.
having me.
It wasn't long enough?
Yeah.
It should have been. Oh, the last meeting.
Yeah. I mean, it was over 2
Well,
hours.
I show up classically half an hour plus late. So, when you get that text from me that says, "Oh shit, my bad, sorry,"
Whoopsie doodle.
that's how you know you scheduled me.
It was
right?
different. We were talking about that. Like last time you were late, we were like, we've made a mistake. No one's ever going to come onto this podcast.
Yeah.
And then this one was like, oh, we'll survive.
We're going to die poor in a gutter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Started pulling the paneling off the walls. Like, this is stupid.
Those things are all true as well, but additionally, I was late. Yeah.
Yeah. Such is life. How did I turn up his microphone last time?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I think it's this one.
I don't know.
Just for my ears. You know what? Let's go ahead and take that all the way up. See how that goes. Yeah, so thanks for coming back. Yeah, the last one was too short. We had a million things left that we wanted to talk about. And now that I'm looking at the list, I'm even more excited.
Nice.
Yeah.
We definitely wanted to
Cool.
get a little bit deeper into programming
Yeah.
Do it.
concepts.
We did get though we were told that we have to ask you about blackjack and a peanut can.
Oh yeah. So when I is this going to be? Are there children that listen to this? No, just kidding. So I moved to Northern California. So I live in what people call Northern California right now, which is Oakland, Bay Area.
Okay.
But in California, that's really the middle of the state. There's a Northern California, which is like Redding. Redding's the only city up there. And there's like Shasta, Mount Shasta.
Right.
But the first time I moved out of state, so I grew up in Montana. I moved to California to train with a guy who I met on this website called Elite FTS.
Oh, okay.
You remember that?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I remember Elite FTS.
Yeah.
Just waiting for
And
Ender
his-
or something.
Yeah, I was real
Yeah.
worried about where it was going to go.
yeah.
You could have said much worse things.
Grinder wasn't a thing back then, but it would have been the 2005 version of that.
Uh-huh.
No, so I met this guy. His name was James Smith. He had a sort of moniker on the site called The Thinker. And, I had been training for a long time up until then, but I was like really struggling. I wasn't making any progress. Everything was rough. And I was like, I'm going to try something different. So I contacted him. And then pretty quickly after a few phone calls, he was like, hey, I've got a spare bedroom. You could come out here and live with us, and, we'll rent you the room and you could train with me, and, we'll see if we can improve you. So I went out there, and the whole story, like me getting out there, was so ridiculous. Like I had $1,000 to my name. I had this car that was like this Oldsmobile that, for whatever reason, they designed the door handles to be vertical. And then on top of that, the door handles were made out of magnesium. And in Montana, it would get like to 30 below zero. And the handle just snapped off one day. So I couldn't open the driver's side door. So I had to like leave window cracked and the passenger side door unlocked and crawl in the car from that side until that handle broke off. And then I had to just leave the window open. So I'd like reach in and just open the door.
I had that
But-
same car. I mean, not an
Yeah.
Oldsmobile, but doors were broken.
Same thing, right? So it's a total side note. I had a car once that the only in Montana would this happen. It was parked out in front of our house and the back window got smashed in. And I thought, oh man, someone threw a block of ice through it. And then, a couple days later, or a week later, or whatever, I realized no, they had thrown I found a paper wrapper. The car stunk. I found this paper wrapper around what used to be frozen elk meat, and I could tell that because it said elk on it. So someone had thrown like frozen ground elk through the back window of one of my cars at some point. Um, anyways, I had this car. It was totally busted up. I didn't have a lot of money. I drove out to California. I got about halfway, a quarter of the way out of the state. The car broke down. Couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. I drove home, kind of finally got it running, and then tried again and got stuck again. Then eventually they found it. Oh, it's a fuel pump. Tow the thing, get it fixed. The fuel pump's like $400. So I have like $600 when I get to California, and he was going to charge me like $400 a month for rent or something. So I paid him for the rent, and I had $200 to my name, no job, nothing. But he was like, "Hey, I can set you up with the manager of this casino, this Indian casino in Reading, and he can get you a job as a blackjack dealer." And I was like, "Oh, this is great." He's like, "Yeah, you make really good money. Oh, this is perfect." So I show up, I've got $200, and they were like, "Yeah, it's great. Here's how it works. There's a 6 week long class that's free, and it's 4 days a week or 5 days a week, and all you do for 8 hours is play blackjack for like 6 weeks." And the whole point is like you just have to get really, really good at counting when you put a card down. Like you have to know exactly what it is before it hits the table so you can move faster. Because the faster you deal, the more hands get dealt, the more money you make, the more money the
Yeah.
casino makes, right? So like they just want people that are good at this. The real skill is in like being able to talk to people and making everyone have a good time. And even if they're losing, they're still having fun. But you just play for 8 hours a day. You sit at this casino all day and play blackjack for 6 weeks. And it's actually like kind of enjoyable for the first little bit, but then it's just like so monotonous and so bad. But I had $200 to last me for 6 weeks for food. And so I'm going, I'm going, I'm going. And the last week of the class, like the last probably 7 days or 8 days or something, I had $2 left to my name. So I went over to the dollar store, the like equivalent of like the Dollar General or whatever it is. And I'm walking around, I'm like, what's the most food, like calorie dense food I can get that'll last me for the next like as long as possible. And it was like these two big cans. They were bigger than a pound, maybe a pound each. They looked bigger than that, but maybe they were only a pound. But I bought two of them for $2, and I lived off of that for like a week before I got the job. And they give you like free coffee and free like soft drinks and stuff. So I would eat these peanuts like basically I was doing like intermittent fasting, but it was like a 1 week intermittent fast. I was really fucking hungry that last week. I was still training like full time. I was still doing everything else normal. I just had no money and no food and nothing. And I was just praying, like, I hope I get the job and I hope all this works out. And then of course, like I got the job. Because you realize like pretty quickly, you just have to have like a room temperature IQ to pass this. Like
Uh-huh.
as long as you're not a complete idiot, like anybody can learn to do it. Um, and so I got the job, and like the first night, like you make like $300 in cash, like in tips. And so it was like this. That was the moment. I was like, fuck, this is just like the end of this. It's just getting worse and worse. Like last $2, you're gonna drink coffee and have nothing until the end of this, and then when it's all over, what do you do? Like you're just gonna have to leave here or get some job, whatever, doing construction or something. And I was lucky enough to have gotten the job and went that way. But that was it. Like I had these like 2 cans of peanuts for it was at least a week. I think it was just a little over a week, but it was rough. So
I just like the idea that you went to go train to get even stronger. In the first 6 weeks, you just
You don't have any
ate
food.
nothing and
yeah.
got a job.
You know,
as
when I was squatting like every day at Cal Strength, I would do all that with like I would eat like I would get a coffee and a scone, and that was all I ate for the first 3 quarters of the day. I would do 2 or 3 squat workouts off of that, like every day squatting 300 kilos or so, just off a scone. You don't need that much food.
That's the thing that when I was young and getting into
Yeah.
training, I remember like meal timing and carb loading and all those kinds of things
Mm.
super big. in the recommendations that people would give. And it never really struck true with me because I was like, people would go days without food historically for long periods of time and then have to fight a deer to death with their bare hands in order to get dinner. Like, I feel like there should be some mechanisms for buffering, protein and carbohydrates and stuff like that. And then there's been a lot of great
Yeah.
research like the last 5 years where they're like, yeah, feeding windows count a little bit, but
Yeah.
not it's not nearly as much as
I've seen so many people that like so much of like leanness and these things and like just like genetics play such a huge role in these things where I coached a guy, a phenomenal athlete named James Townsend, who year round, like his entire life, he's been jacked, shredded,
he always looks good.
extremely powerful, just like unbelievable, right? And he'd be like, he'll eat McDonald's once a day, and that's his whole diet.
Yeah.
And the dude is just like accidentally puts on, 10 pounds of muscle, just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. Genes are
Meanwhile,
inescapable.
yeah. So, yeah, that was that story. That was what Josh probably wanted to tell you.
Yeah. 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 That's a good one.
Yeah.
All right. So last time when you got off, I had a few more questions for you, and after re-listening for the edit and everything, I got a bunch more, and hopefully some of them are at least make a little bit of sense. But
Cool.
my first one that I got for you, and I don't know, this might be a little in the weeds, but if you're watching, I guess that's what you're here for. But I have a thought experiment for you.
Okay.
So I'm going to say that you wake up in a compound. It's a nice compound. You got a nice big gym,
Hmm.
and it's naturey. You get to go for a walk every day, but you have no access to the internet, and you can't remember anything except for like kind of the like experiential pieces of your training history.
Mm.
So you know what it feels like to do a really hard workout and how long it takes to recover. And you know that, long ranges of motion feel better for, progress than short ones or whatever, right? Like you have all that kind of experiential data left. If you were to think about I feel like I should have sent this question ahead of time because
Just
I'm going to get
fucking
real
no,
into
just
it.
keep going.
Too late.
We're in it.
Yeah, yeah. If you were to think about like the way that you would structure routines in the absence of all of the other social norms that we have, do you think that they would look very different than what they do, uh, given that most people are, slave to a calendar week and all that kind of stuff?
So I once trained, I had a Russian coach send me some weightlifting training,
Hmm.
and it was an interesting approach because he just had workouts every other day. And so you would train on Sunday one week and then not the next week.
Right.
And that felt really good to me. I think that, yeah, you'd probably deviate to like, it's all just like deductive, right? I would say like you're going to train a certain, train as often as you can, train as hard as you can, and then have periods of rest when necessary. So, like, I would say it would probably look similar as like 3 days of training, a day of rest, then, multiple more days. I suppose if you were doing it, you might start to lose a sense of like when that is. So you might have like little bursts of multiple days in a row of hard training and then a little bit of like easy training for a couple of days. If I went by purely by feel, that's what I would notice is like at least three to 4 days in a row of hard lifting and then some one day off or whatever, and then come back to it and do the same 2 or 3 days or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that I've always wondered about. When I first started training, I was just like did a upper lower split. So Monday, Tuesday was, upper lower, and then Thursday, Friday was upper lower, right? Because I had
Yeah.
access to a gym 5 days a week. But
Yeah.
I remember those Monday, Tuesday workouts just feeling like I was invincible and I could, I never missed sets, I never missed reps, everything was fast and strong. And then the Thursday, Friday sets feeling like hot trash every week. And I was like, why do people do this? Like it seems silly to me?
I think so. So I'm curious. So one thing we've done with like the AI stuff that we're working on now is like modeling this idea, this concept of fatigue.
Uh-huh.
So you would have like training stimulus, training load that's given to an athlete. Then after the athlete performs that training load, and essentially it's been, instantiated, then we ask, okay, how much of that is now fatigue? And then at what rate does that fatigue decay over time?
Hmm.
And with this model, our goal is to sort of be able to say, okay, like what should this look like in a week of training? Like we kind of know basic things, like you're going to do your highest technical stuff first, your, you know, fastest movements in the beginning of training. But as you accumulate more fatigue, so as the cumulative fatigue you're carrying starts to grow, your training should shift more towards things that are not as impacted by that fatigue. So, strength work and endurance and hypertrophy stuff. So I would think that the longer you have a stretch of uninterrupted training, the slower and more, uh, you know, um, extensive the training should become. So you would
Yeah.
go from like snatches on Monday, clean and jerks on Tuesday. Maybe Wednesday becomes like squatting and pulling, right?
Uh-huh.
And then you start again on after Thursday off, start on Friday, and you have, snatch and then, maybe clean and jerk same day, and then kind of go from there. And you see this kind of structure naturally appear all the time. Monday is snatch, Wednesday is clean and jerk, and then Friday or Saturday is like both lifts together, but after a day of rest. I think if you had something, if you were to like, sort of think about how you're going to feel when you train as you get more fatigue, like that's a natural progression. So I would think that like the deviation, the intelligent deviation in structuring a program organically would always follow that kind of suit. Because you're not going to come in on a Friday when you feel sluggish and slow and shitty and snatch and
Yeah.
think it's going to go well. You kind of know right off the bat it's a bad idea.
Yeah. I think that's a really good comment because I would always do, again, as a brand new to the weight room high school kid, right? I would do my biggest, hardest, fastest stuff on Monday and Tuesday, and
Yeah.
then try to do it again on Thursday and Friday and feel like trash, right? So like
Yeah.
if I had been a little smarter about it and done the speed and the technical things really hard in the first half of the week and the heavy stuff in the back half, I might have
Yeah.
enjoyed that process a lot more.
A point to make for listeners, for anybody, is the most obvious version of this. I think people would like say for powerlifting, you'd say, oh, well, we'll squat Monday and, whatever, deadlift Wednesday, and then, bench kind of in all over. But you could always think about it like, hey, if Monday is always a great session, if Monday
Uh-huh.
is always coming off of an easy day of training, Monday should theoretically just be the lift that needs the most attention, because you're going to have the highest performance there and you have the most resources allocated to it. So Monday could be like a deadlift day if deadlift is your weakness, or Monday could be, a squat day where it's heavily focused on squat or bench or whatever. And just sort of think about like what are the days that an athlete has typically the lowest fatigue, going in. It's going to be a
Hmm.
day after a day of rest. That's when you would plan for like the most important stuff, which is the stuff they're bad at.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. The stuff that you're bad at being the most important thing, I think, is a great takeaway for your entire training career because that's kind of the thing for me that always moved it. Like when you hit a plateau,
Yeah.
it's like reevaluating, like, okay, well, what am I bad at? Like that's probably what I should be working on, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least in my experience, being a high school strength coach, like what you were saying there, basically you answered it by saying you're going to wrap it all around fatigue management.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I just you don't hear a lot. Like a lot of guys just get that initial, or this is what I learned in high school, which
Right.
for us was just go 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 go,
Right.
and then you have a weekend.
Yeah.
So like really trying to intelligently control the fatigue
Yeah.
is the smart
Yeah.
answer. It's not always. I don't feel like it's the easiest answer because it's not like the sexy thing. It's
Yeah.
sexier to make the kids or make
Hmm.
the people go. You
I
know.
think there's a lot that happens inside of the training space that is, like you said, like is based on culture more than anything else. So if you thought about it like totally logically, what would be the easiest way to like auto-regulate training? And it would be by like adjusting the number of reps you do in a set, right?
Hmm.
Like rather than have athletes pick a weight, then perform a set, and then find out that that was too much weight for the number of reps you did, like that's a backwards process. It's like then you have to waste energy trying to find the right load for the day. But you could just allocate the load to the session, say, hey, today we're going to do 100 kilos in the squat. We want a bar velocity, or we just want the bar to move a certain speed. And you have to say, like, do enough reps in the set until you reach that threshold, right? then you're always being able to optimize in strength for an increase in the load without having to sit there and troubleshoot how to actually find that weight. You can obviously program accurately and get close to that, but like just using the number of reps in a set would be a fantastic way to auto regulate without any problems as far as like needing to troubleshoot, because you would just work up. And as you're doing rep number two, if you think rep three is going to be slow, you stop the set. Then you just accumulate a certain amount of volume at that load over however many sets it takes to get to that total rep range. That's a really much smarter way of auto regulating as far as like being able to really control for the thing that's most important, which is the variable of load, which is you always want to be able to assign the increase in load to match what their fitness level is. But the difficulty of that for a prescribed number of reps can be hard to get to. So
Yeah,
that's one example of like it's awkward. No one trains like that.
I do.
There's programs out there. I mean, people do, and people who have trained intuitively a long time
Yeah, yeah.
can train like that. But that's like a good example where it's like very not cultural to do that. The other thing I'd say is like people that program in ways where they will do, they believe incorrectly that the progression in the program is what drives progress, not the other way around, that the training drives the necessity to have a progression. So you have to do training in order to get stronger. Therefore, training always precedes progression. So if you do training and then your body gets stronger, you need more stimulus to get progress to make adaptations, right? So it's not that, hey, our progression is every week we go up 2.5%. That just happens to be a lucky guess or a decent approximation of about how much progress someone might make in a week. But ultimately, it could be that somebody doesn't make progress at that same rate. So your assignment of training load to them week to week and the progression should match their fitness level, and that fitness level should increase basically in a linear fashion as they train. As they do training, they get stronger. Fatigue masks that obviously, but you get stronger, then you have to adjust the training load to match your new level of performance. And that's another example where like it's culturally just very simple to be like every week we add 5 pounds, right? 5 pounds. Or it's like that's just like a natural thing. And it works in a lot of cases because it's close to the ideal. But when you think about like purely optimizing or purely building training around the most logical processes, it would look different than it does. So going back to the original question of like what would you do? Like if you imagine somebody in a vacuum might end up coming up with ideas that are different than what we do now.
Yeah. Yeah, I've long trained just like in 5 day rounds, and
Mm-hmm.
three of them are lifting and two of them are rest days, and I've always done it because I'm a crazy person and I can't
Yeah.
moderate, right? So like when I'm gonna lift weights, I'm gonna lift weights, and the only way for me to do that is to show up fresh every time. Still run into issues with building up systemic fatigue, and I need a deload every 6 to 12 weeks or whatever. But it's been really productive, and I've really enjoyed it. The biggest thing I've run into, though, trying to get other people to think about it differently is just the fact that they do have, Sunday is, church and family, and
Yeah.
Tuesday is games, and like they have their own routine that they're doing, and it's hard to just throw a wrench in there and be like, no, you just plan to work out every day, and then the rest days are like a bonus, like
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, a lot of people will, I think you have an interesting situation where it's like you say every 5 days I train and it works well for you.
hmm
That's one of those things where Josh and I had this conversation the other day, which is like people will downplay the importance of individualization in a program
yeah,
from the
tremendously.
from the perspective that like, well, it happens more than anything in weightlifting, where weightlifting is very like a lot of the coaches in it, they want their life to be easier and simpler, so they make up things that are like, oh, you just got to go heavy all the time, or you got to do this, or you got to do that, or it's all technique, or it's heart, or it's aggression. Like when the reality is like you might have an athlete who just is not going to do well because you're giving them way too little volume or way too much, or
hmm
you know you're picking out of 10 exercises you pick to remediate their technique, only 3 of them are useful. And so it's like you have these situations where in your case, like individualizing training to be super hard every 5 days will work well. That's something you wouldn't really discover unless you trained a lot and took like a sort of, inventory of yourself as you're training and seeing where things actually happen. But it's such a big deal because I imagine you training completely polar opposite to that, how much worse you might be or how much more difficult it might be to make progress. And then you might just start attaching ideas to yourself like, well, I just don't make progress. I'm not very good at it.
Uh-huh.
When small shift or a change in the training program might be dramatic and you might be way, way stronger because of it.
Yeah, for me, doing the higher frequency thing was just a large degree of little aches and sprains and strains. Like I mean, I don't know. Have you had the experience like coaching? I I definitely find kids who I think like make better candidates for high frequency or high volume training based on largely on like some kids when they lift weights, they look like they're trying to take the muscle off the bone. Like
Yeah.
they just are so good at trying really hard. And then those kids end up being like, if I put this kid in a super high frequency program, they just fall apart. Like they don't stay together. And I
Yeah.
know that that's a like a qualitative thing, and it's really hard to back that up with like evidence and stuff. But that was always kind of my experience, is I seem like I just always tried way harder than everybody else, and I could be lying to myself, right? But um, that was a big part of why the higher frequency stuff wasn't really my jam.
Yeah. One thing too about like everything you do, every decision you make in training is a trade-off. It's always a question of like, what am I giving up in order to, what is the exchange for this choice versus a different choice?
Hmm.
And there are no right choices. Everything is wrong. Every choice is wrong. It's just a matter of how wrong it is.
Yeah.
And so if you take that approach, you'd always be looking at your training from the process of like, well, what justifies the need for high frequency? Like, what do we get for high frequency? Well, we get at the expense of, say, fatigue management, we get, an increased exposure to technical skills. Maybe more volume can be accumulated than if we did them in different scheme.
Hmm.
But ultimately, you'd ask yourself, here's the trade-off: much more difficult fatigue management, a reduction in the size of the training sessions, a reduction in the magnitude of those sessions, and then at the end of that, you'd say, is what I'm getting for this worth it in the trade-off? Where if I had just 2 sessions a week, I could, develop all those same skills. So the question would come down to if I've got, you know, uh, something like a snatch, I need to develop a skill there. There's a little dog here. If I've got the snatch, I need to jack up the frequency high because I really want to have as much exposure to the skill as I can get. And then how do I now, you know, weave fatigue management into this program? Because what I'm optimizing for in my training is skill exposure, skill development, and exposure to that skill. Whereas like high frequency is not a great option for maximum strength,
Right.
right? But to max out our squat every single day, you can do it, but it's like you don't really get the thing you're looking for. There's way better things you can do as a trade-off to get to that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the thoughts I had about we talked a little bit last time about the machine vision, and I went to bed and it kept me up at night because I was thinking about it. I've often felt like you can see if somebody's going to get stronger, like through the quality of their work. Have you had that experience? Like if you watch somebody do a squat workout or a bench workout where you're like, yeah, that one counted?
As far as like how hard it was, or
I mean, I don't
like,
even know if it's necessarily just a thing of like how hard they worked, but I think it maybe the hurdle for doing this for machine vision is how complex it is because there's a lot of things, right? Like it might
so
be the look
this
on
is
their
my
face and the pace and all that kind of stuff.
this is one of my favorite things because I've gotten so much more into this stuff now over the last few years. But um, the questions would be like, there's a bunch of different methods you could use to sort of solve this problem. One would be like something like an end-to-end solution where you put a video in and you get a result out. So if we want to know the RPE of a set, we put a video in, it runs through the machine, through the AI model, and then it spits out a uh, you know, this
9.5.
yeah 9.5 RPE, right?
Yeah.
And in order to train that, what you would do is just get videos of lifters that have a, like I say, a squat. They do a squat and they rate the set. This was a RPE 7. This was a 9. This is a 10, right?
Which is kind of a train wreck when it's self-directed.
It can be, right? It can be. And if you ran enough videos through that, you'd probably be able to train it to recognize that. If a coach can watch someone do a squat at a certain RPE with enough data, an AI model could do the same, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah, yeah.
question is how much data and how much labeling do you need is a different question, but essentially you have that solution. The other would be to go like a composite route of like, let's say we get like velocity data, so we can extract velocity data with a different model. That velocity data then can be correlated to an RPE. So we would say, okay, this guy bar speed dropped from, 1 meter a second to zero point 0.8 meters a second, right? Where this bar is moving at this velocity, therefore that's the RPE. And you could extract data that way. You could do some combination of these things, but ultimately, like the problem is solvable. It's just a question of what is the magnitude of data and you know training and all these things you need to get to that result. There was a cool paper that I saw a while back where they had coaches evaluate people's RPEs on
Yeah.
sets that they didn't know, and they were fairly accurate. They're accurate within like a one RPE, which you know is, I mean, the irony of all this is like, yeah, it's like it's all subjective, right? Like you could
Right.
do RP 7 and bang out 8 more reps, right? The question is always going to come down to like how good is the actual subjective measure. But the fact that coaches can see it and could look at it, I think this is a solvable thing, and we're actually going to try to do this so we can like someone could do a squat. We'll have enough data because our app allows athletes to enter an RPE in for every set. So the more of this we can collect, we have 10,000 athletes on the platform. We can collect all this data and start to train a model to recognize these things, in addition to using velocity data. But I think that would be a solvable problem, and it would be kind of cool to where an athlete could put a video in, they rate their set, and they would say, "I rated it like this."
Hmm.
I said 7. You think it's a 7.5. That's maybe we do something like that. Maybe we don't. I'm not sure yet, but yeah, I think it's a solvable problem.
I love the idea that the AI would start like talking shit.
You're not
Like,
working hard
yeah,
enough. You got to do another
Yeah.
set. Work harder.
you thought that was a 7? I thought that was a 9.
So
Well,
there's
I hope you
I've
had
had
to do
all
it.
these weird ideas of like you can train voice models, so you can train like audio models, and they're some of them are extremely good. And I have this idea of like celebrity coaches. Like, so you have your AI app, you do your training, and then like Denzel Washington is coaching your squat. But like it's all trained on like Denzel Washington from like Training Day and
Training
Man
Uh-huh.
day.
on Fire. So he's like fucking awful to you. Like it's in your ear. So you're doing squats and he's just like saying shit that's like, you know,
You don't
just
even
so
belong
fucking,
here.
yeah, yeah. What are you doing here, son? Like you just like, just feel like, oh shit, shit, like panicking. I think that'd be
That's
awesome.
actually fucking wonderful because that is what I say. Like, if I had a personal trainer, I'd want it to be a large, aggressive man
Who
that just
just
Yeah.
yelled
tells
like,
you you're not good enough.
yeah, just
Oh yeah.
like that. I felt like that would be the best coach.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, it's
Right.
just good hustle. And you're like, yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
It's your hustle. Yeah, I had thought about that. I was trying to think about what it is because I feel like in my experience, I've had a lot of times where I've watched people working out and I'm like, you're just going through the motions, even if they're getting close to failure, and I was like, what are the keys? And it might even be things like, the way that they put their weight away. Like you watch somebody
Yeah.
put their squat away and then they get out of it like a beat dog and it's like, oh, okay, they did something. Or like the panic on rep 8 of 10, when you
Yeah.
see on their face, they don't know if they're gonna live or die. But yeah, I was just really curious about what all those like I also wondered if since you can track, you can see like, hey, we have video of the previous session, and what we're going to use is the next session they're reporting that it's easy, right? Like so, like
Yeah.
the next session they report that they were stronger for the last one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just something I was curious about.
When we have people come in the gym, it's something I noticed early on, but like everybody that would come in the gym when I was in there coaching, I asked everybody the same question, which is like, how you feeling today? And I realized I didn't care about the words they said. It never mattered what they said. All I was waiting for to hear was the like inflection, the tone of their voice.
Uh-huh.
And you start to realize like all I want to know is like when I say how are you feeling, they're going to say one thing or the other. They might say, day's hard or whatever. And then you crack a joke or you give them a hard time and they just lose all of that whole state of mind. They feel good,
Yeah.
right? Or they come in, they feel awesome, and you might kind of push them and challenge them a little bit and it gets them fired up for the day. But like most of that, you're just trying to feel out like, is this person in the right mindset right now to put their
Hmm.
best effort forward to the session? And it's like the simplest question. It's honestly, I think, as good, if not better than anything I've seen from like any kind of, wearable tracking device or anything like that. It's just asking someone, how do you feel today? Because you can tell right away, like their state of mind is influenced not just by their physical readiness, but like, do they believe they're in a good shape?
Uh-huh.
Right? Do they think they're able to perform the session really well? There was a study done on weightlifters at the OTC where they had them take a day of sleep deprivation, two groups, a control group slept, then they did a training session up to like 90%. And I think there was some degree of like, you could do more work or something, right? And like, so they wanted to see like what happened with one day of sleep deprivation. And both groups of athletes accomplished the exact same workloads basically. No, there was no like real difference in performance. But on the subjective like questionnaires afterward, the group that was sleep deprived just like everything was super negative and like it felt shitty and I felt terrible and blah 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 blah. Even though the performance metrics were identical, like there was no real drop off in performance after one day of sleep deprivation.
Right.
Um, and so it's interesting because like think about how you would walk into a gym if you hadn't eaten lunch, if you're a high school student, you drank I don't know
Seven
what
Red
kids,
Bulls.
I don't know what kids drink today, Four Locos at lunch or something.
Vape.
And yeah, and you show up, right? You down your 40 of oldie and you walk in the weight room and you're like, "Hey coach, I'm ready." Like that's different than kids who, had a lunch they brought from school, from home, and like they feel good, they're rested. Their mindset might just be so much better that they're gonna perform. And so it's
Yeah.
like little things like that. You don't realize that like just getting that to happen at that level is a big deal, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, then I just going to snowball because then all of a sudden your anxiety markers and depression are going to be up, your recovery is going to be shitty, or your sleep's going to
Yeah.
be shittier. Like, so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just a snowball of,
Feeds into itself.
yeah.
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 Yeah. Um, uh, we talked last time about kind of like compliance is the science a little bit, executing the plan, right? What
Yeah.
are like in your experience as a coach, what are the big deficits for execution and then communication with athletes? Like what are the real hard points?
As far as like getting people or getting people to buy in to comply or
Yeah,
more
so
so like
I think it's probably like a kind of two parts. So one is just getting the compliance, like doing the sets,
yeah.
doing the reps, getting the sleep, eating your food, you know what I mean? And
I mean,
then oh good.
oh sorry. Well, let me answer that first. Like
Yeah.
a lot of the people I work with at the high level, they were that person from day one. They were these
Right.
type A, like, ex gymnasts or high level CrossFit athletes that got into weightlifting or powerlifting. Like these people were cut from a different cloth and just driven to be like that. And if you want to achieve high level success and you don't have just, one in a billion genetics, like if you don't have that right off the bat, it's going to be extremely hard for you to get to a high level.
Yeah.
And so like most of those people were just, they were the kind of people that if you like told them, hey, to get better, you got to eat shit, they would ask if they could put salt on it. Like they wouldn't think about not doing what you asked. They just are like, all right, well, like tell me when.
What
Right.
brand?
Yeah, it's a very different kind of personality. But for the sort of everyone else, the normies and the rest of us, like that stuff is something where it's like buying in is the biggest thing. You got to believe 100% that the things you're doing are making you better. And and all of what coaches do outside of writing great programming and communicating is like getting you to see the bigger vision, which they see, right? Which is to say, hey, right now you're squatting 315 or whatever, but we can get you to squat, 550. And it's like so far down the line that it's impossible to conceive of, but you can build this. Basically, what you're doing as a coach is building a case to show them. You're building this sort of like, hey, if you do these things, if this happens, and you continue to progress and you keep doing these things, you're going to get better. That's like the most important job for a coach, to get someone to the top level. And it's just a matter of like every little trick you can figure out to sort of continue that process, so they're always buying into what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then the back half of that question was like the communication piece. Like do you think are like the most consistent, communication hurdles for working with athletes?
I mean, don't be like me and like, yeah, like I've when you get super busy and you start to fall off and do a good job of communicating, that's, the saying goes, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And if you don't take the effort to really like get that point across, which is to communicate on a regular basis with your athletes, reach out to them. If you're remote coaching them, you're sending them messages on a regular basis so they know that they're alive, that you're concerned with their progress. But then even in person, it's like you just going that extra distance as a person to try and connect with people. If you're not a good communicator, you can't be a coach. It just doesn't work,
Yeah.
right? Like coaching is all about giving giving someone a really good suggestion and really good advice, and then hoping they take it, right? Because ultimately you're not going to lift the weight for them. You have to
Yeah.
just suggest to them, hey, I think today if you bench press 5 sets of three at 105 kilos, it'd be a really good idea. And they decide if they're going to do exactly that or something different. And
Right.
all of that is about building rapport, communication, just connecting. I mean, if you don't know how to connect with people as a coach, then that's something to look at. And that's a real thing. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't really grasp like what it is to have rapport with somebody, like what a joke is that they're going to appreciate versus be offended by, or what kind of stuff they want to, how they want to be in the gym. Do they like to talk because when they talk, they feel comfortable and then they stay focused? Or if they don't like talking because they want to be hyper focused and that distracts them. Like you just have to learn these things about your athletes.
Yeah. Yeah, I know dealing with high school kids, I know my biggest frustration is we had a lifter a couple years ago who was like, "Oh, I can't work out today." And we're like, "Why not?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm supposed to go to a physical therapist because my knee's gotten so bad I can't get up in the morning." And we're like, "You haven't mentioned anything. You've done all of your warm-ups, all of your workouts. Like in 5 weeks this has been bugging
Yeah.
you and you didn't ever say anything." You know?
Yeah.
So I
Well,
suppose
it's also,
oh
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it's a lot funny. Like people will be in that space. I've talked to a bunch of people that are like non-English speakers as like a first language. And my favorite story ever is my Bulgarian friend, he was a weightlifter. He asked somebody one time, he says, Dave, when will I learn to speak English? And it's like kind of funny because like his mindset was just like, I can't speak English, even though he was doing it. He just thinks that it's wrong. And it's the same thing. It's like there's like two separate things in this kid's mind. Like, oh, my knee is bad. I need to go to the PT, but I have to do my workout right now. I'm going to do that first, then I'll go because my knee is bad and I need to fix it. Like they just don't intersect in his brain, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so
Yeah,
there's some layer there of having to front load that information to your
yeah,
athletes. Be like, you need to tell me.
yeah, yeah.
I need to know. Um, so how much like when you're programming for people as part of like on that building rapport piece of it, right? Training can get pretty monotonous. Like when you are talking to your athletes, are you trying to build a certain amount of variety into the workouts and a certain amount of routine, or do you just tell them like this is the prescription and it's going to make the best you and we're going to do it, you know?
Yeah, I
Or
mean, I
oh,
no, to I there's different types of athletes. So, I can say like I've had a few athletes that were extremely talented, but if you gave them something new, it would take them 3 weeks to a month to figure out how to do it. But then they'd be exceptional and they'd make a lot of progress. So the initial disruption of training with variation or variety would really throw them off. Whereas other athletes, after 2, 3 sessions of something, would be so bored with it, they would just be needing something totally different. Or you could give them a new exercise, and every time they do something new, they're making progress because it's just the novelty of it is so invigorating that it's like you see a total opposite of the first group. So kind of understanding each athlete, like how much variety is necessary to keep them as motivated as possible. And there's a balance, right? Like, you know, too much variation is just chaotic. Not enough is just total monotony. In my experience, more variation in a program generally gets better adherence. And there's been I saw some research on like in hypertrophy, they had people do basically the same exercise over and over again versus volume equated programming with a variety of different exercises and different sort of like eccentric loads and these kinds of things. No real difference, from either one. So it wasn't that a ton of variation was like valuable, but it wasn't detrimental. And I
Hmm.
think that if you ask people, would you rather do a program where you do exercises that rotate every few weeks or do the same exact exercise over and over and over and over again? You're going to get most people saying they would want the variety. So use variety, increase variety to the point that it doesn't irritate your athletes, right?
Yeah.
And then you're going to get one more exposure to different skills, but also more adherence and more buy-in because the program is at least interesting and enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, in the last meet that we talked about, we had a couple little conversations about the traits that are looked for, right? In a like the desire to compete, the desire to work hard, like all those kinds of things that show up that are really good. Do you find that you have to kind of have the conversation with your athletes about regulating like when it's appropriate to be dispassionate about what you're doing and when it's appropriate to be passionate about what you're doing? So the big thing I'm thinking about is like kind of the time frame for training, right? Like when you make changes or you got to do something for a long time, if you have the super competitive, super driven people, oftentimes it's hard for them to change gears or, to keep doing something that they don't feel like is effective. Is that a real hurdle?
Yeah, I think the mistakes I made as an athlete, my own lifting, was not planning time um to have like off seasons where I was away from the actual competitive movements and training for a particular competition. Um, it's like you have to give yourself the gift of missing the thing,
Yeah.
right? Like be excited about wanting to do it again. And if you're not able to manage that and get an athlete to that place where, hey, you just did a big competition and we planned like a down period in your training, like here you go. Let's have a downtime for 2 months of off-season stuff. If you're a power lifter, let's do a bunch of athletic stuff, and for most powerlifters, that might just be walking up a flight of steps. But
How dare you, sir? I'm sitting right
for
here. How dare you?
for for us non-power, well, I was a power lifter, so for everyone else, it might be like, for a weightlifter, that might be a bunch of like, bounding and sprinting and running and jumping exercises and maybe like some bodybuilding type training. For powerlifting, yeah, it might be more athletic, kind of running and bounding stuff, or any number of these different things. Train like you're on a team sport. Do that in a way where you can keep training exciting, you can build some general fitness qualities, but also you're getting them away from the sense of like the next meet is right around the corner. I'm just going to do the exact same stuff. And the only thing I can say to this is that it's most people burn out of this stuff and quit so quickly. Like there was that survey done for powerlifters, and they basically found like the churn rate of powerlifting is like 95% after a year or something, or after 3 years. Like most people get in and get out really fast. One, because it's super boring, but also a lot of them probably get to a point where they make a ton of progress, then everything in their existence in that sport has just been like go to the gym, do the same things, get stronger, get stronger, get stronger, go to a meet, do that, start over, and like they might get an injury or they might just burn out because they're like, this is super boring. But if you spread that out over twice as long a period of time and you had a whole 3 months allocated in the year to be like, maybe it's 1 month at a time, maybe it's two and one or whatever, but allocated to like just backing off from the sport, getting away from it, doing something completely different that's still physical and still training, but gets you, sort of reinvigorated to start again. I think you'd extend those careers much longer, and people might stay in the sport way longer because they're used to the up and down seasonal nature of it.
Yeah.
So I got some on that. So let's say You had an athlete, they just finished a meet. They don't have another meet for, let's just say, 9 months.
Mhm.
So you're like, oh, okay, maybe we'll start back up at month 6. And that's when we're going to start. Would you, and we'll say a powerlifter, when you're training the other things, would you still, like, how close to, let's say, a squat are you getting? Are we doing a squat, but we're going to do it in a different style? Like maybe we're going to just look at velocity. Or are we just going to do some front squat? Are we not doing squat? Maybe we're doing just like single leg movements. Like when we're saying get away from it, how far, because some people are going to say, they're like, oh, Max told me to not squat for 3 months, which might be that could be, I honestly don't
You
know.
know, that's a good question. Like I've talked to so many people that have everyone will sit down as coaches in these like round tables and chat about stuff and be like, yeah, you should really have like a period where you take time off and you don't squat. And I've never seen a weightlifting coach or powerlifting coach not squatting. Like they're always every week of the year there's a squat variation. So I think, maybe for a short time you don't do any squatting. You take, let's say you take 3 weeks off from all the barbell movements altogether, right? And this is not an attempt to improve performance. You will take a loss to some degree,
Right.
but it's in an attempt to improve adherence and buy-in and keep somebody excited about the sport. So the trade-off is worth it again, right? It's a question of what's the value. You could also go to, if you do a lot of like, if your program is really sort of concentrated around high specificity where you don't have a lot of variation, maybe you do like a safety bar squat or you do like, you know, whatever cambered bar squats or some kind of funky variations or front squats or just stuff that's different. Maybe just do leg press for 3 weeks, right? Um, it might just be that where you do some similar squatting type movements, but really get away from any barbell type stuff.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, when you're working on the rapport side of things, right? Training can get long, like after, you've been working with somebody for like 9 months and you're coming towards the end of a volume block, maybe if you do some linear periodization or whatever, and they're feeling kind of beat up and tired and stressed out. What tools do you give an athlete to help them regulate, like even like intercession or in a block? How's that conversation go to keep them so that they're like mentally not frying out? What are the regulation knobs that you dial?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the first sign of like fatigue management is like, are people losing motivation?
Hmm.
Right? That's like the first thing to go is sort of just like lack of desire to do the thing. And I would say that's an indication that like something needs to give in the program. Like you're either doing, you know, too much of the same stuff, you're doing too much, the magnitude of it is too high. Whatever it is like it's irritating them enough that it's like it's tough to get them to be comfortable.
Hmm.
So the first thing is like, one, are they just having bad days because their life sucks or whatever? They got some shit going on. And from a rapport standpoint, it's just about, being able to connect with them and take them aside and, talk to them about what's happening. Um, it's also, I think it's really important as a coach to be a really stable and consistent personality, like from the perspective of when you say stuff, you do it.
Hmm.
And so that builds trust in people. When you say what you're going to do and then you do it, you just automatically, that's what trust is, right? So you have to have that sort of mentality where you don't promise something and then can't deliver on it. You don't say things then do the opposite, because what you get then is more and more doubt that builds up in people's minds. So when you do say to them they're having a bad day, hey, if you trust me, you'll make this or you'll do this or you'll get better, they can they just have a natural sense to believe that. If you're the
Hmm.
kind of person who it might be a lot of little choices, but if you don't stand up and you don't feel to them subconsciously like a concrete personality and have clear boundaries, what you say has less value to them, right? They just won't necessarily buy it or believe it. So I
Hmm.
think it's important to demonstrate those qualities in front of people so that when you get to a point where you need to actually explain to them things or have them do stuff, or walk them through a time when they need some more guidance, like they're going to buy in really quickly.
How
Yeah.
much more difficult is that to do with online clients?
That's hard. I mean,
I
that's
feel
tough
like it
because
just
like,
happens.
yeah, in person, you're around people so much and they just build that up. It's like you're going to learn somebody's personality really quickly. Online, I mean, remotely, like you have to probably start setting up video calls on a regular basis, right? Be communicating with people on a regular basis. I would encourage people who do a lot of remote coaching to like engage in inviting people to competitions or camps even. Try to create some kind of sense of community so that when you do speak to them, they're familiar with a lot of other stuff going on. It's not just like, hey, let's get on a phone call and talk about your training. It's like get on a phone call, take 2 or 3 minutes to chat about how life is going, and then kind of go from there. But it's harder, remotely for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. You answered it right there. I was thinking, man, that can get expensive if you're trying to go see your athletes across
Oh
the
yeah,
country. I was
no,
like, dang, you're gonna lose money, but that makes sense. Just inviting
yeah,
them out to
yeah.
things that you are already attending or hosting.
Yeah, and you can always set up those things. Like I think the training camp thing is just such an underappreciated event. Like we do training camps and we've done them over the years, but if I was only gonna do one thing, I would do training camps. Like if that's all I could do, I would just have these camps where people show up, they take a little bit of time off of work, so they're totally dedicated to doing that. They're in a new space, so they don't have anything with work going on. So you can get really good training in. Everyone's focused on it. And if a bunch of people come out, they build relationships with each other. A lot of people I know that did training camps with each other 10 years ago, at some whatever famous coach's house or something, or like they still talk about those times. So it does a lot to build rapport and camaraderie. It's a lot like, probably high school team sports, right? You train double days in the summer or whatever, and it's like you got everyone's kind of in the same stuff, same shitty position together, pushing each other. The difference is like those kids are kind of just there because they want to do the sport, whereas these people are usually doing it because they love it. So, yeah, I,
Yeah.
I think that's a super valuable element to all this.
Yeah, every training camp I've ever done has been like 6 to 9 months of gasoline. Like it just
Yeah, yeah.
it's a big propellant.
Totally, totally. And if you have them often enough and frequent enough, people really value that a lot. I mean, the remote people, in my opinion, value it more than anyone else because a lot of the people that are remote are usually out of necessity. Like, I've got athletes that were in like Switzerland, and there just was not a lot of lifting going on. So the idea of like, oh, I can fly over to a camp in Europe or in Europe in the UK, like that'd be great. I love that. And they're super down for it. Or, whatever, if you got kids that are training with you that maybe train alone or train in their garage or do these things like because they're just kind of in some town that has no lifting coaches or whatever.
Right.
That's a huge experience. And it can be like you said, like gasoline on the fire, but it can be like a life-changing event for some younger people where they suddenly show up, they meet this person who's been coaching them, they meet people that are friends with them, and it's just like a fantastic experience for whatever, like growing your interest in the sport.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Are there any other like big like so obviously like the relationship's big and then there's tools like a training camp. Are there any other tools you found that you feel like are really good at creating a little extra fire in athletes for a while?
I think building like a healthy sense of competition, like
Yeah.
between people. My coach was huge on the idea of like you should be training as a competitor, not just like you should be training your mind to be a competitor, someone who wants to be in the fight. You don't want somebody who, if it's sport, right? And sport is competitive. So you need to foster a healthy sense of I am capable of competing with people and I like the chance to fight with somebody, to fight against somebody to win. And so his whole thing was about like finding people that are similar to you as your ability level and creating every opportunity you can to push each other to drive each other higher. Um, so we would do things, we have heavy practices or heavy training sessions. He would, sometimes be like, okay, you know, Max, you've got to do 105 to win, and Damon, you've got to do 117. And so he would just kind of pick numbers, and it was like, well, whoever gets closer to that number, right?
Hmm.
Because he could tell how what shape you're in. He's not going to ask you to just outlift somebody if you can't, but he would just like create this thing of like, hey, If he hits his number, you got to hit yours. And that just always is going to create a better environment, right? You're going to drive yourself harder, you're going to push each other. But it's a cool kind of way of like getting you into that mindset of like being comfortable with the idea that like you're going to go to the competition, get on the platform, and you have to make lifts to win. That
Right.
should be the most comfortable state for everybody in these sports because that's the most important thing, right? Outside of just getting stronger. But like if you get to a platform and you're a huge pussy, like you're not going anywhere. And the
Yeah, and
saddest
I'm
thing is
right
seeing,
here, you know?
yeah, yeah, right, right. Um, the saddest thing is like seeing somebody who has incredible amounts of talent who gets on the platform and is just like a puddle, just falls apart, and they get just destroyed by people that are way less gifted, but mentally so strong that they can just run through people, you know? And that's hard. That's something that you just, you foster as much as possible, but some people just aren't that person.
Hmm.
So it's tough.
Yeah, and it definitely says something about the environment that you train in, right? Like if you're in a gym with a lot of people, that social anxiety part's not quite as bad. If you're like me and you
Yeah.
train by yourself in the dark in your own little troll cave, then you get around 50 people, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, what's happening?
Right, right. And it's also like you got to remember there's trade-offs too, where it's like I've been in gyms that were hugely successful with athletes that were super, just toxic environments where everybody hated each other and everyone hated everyone there. And it was like it was not trying, it was like there's a difference between like fostering that environment through encouragement and through leadership and saying you do this, you do that, and finding victories for each of those people. Because our coach was great at like he would pick numbers that he could steer the competition toward the person who needed the victory, right?
Hmm.
Or to challenge somebody else. If you're lagging behind, he might force you to push yourself harder. But you get to other environments where it's like a chaotic version of that is just like, oh, just throw a bunch of super strong guys in a gym and just let them have at it. And whoever climbs to the top wins. Um, you can get just a super shitty environment where you just ruin people's careers because they just hate it. They just hate the place they're in. They don't want to do it. It's just like it's not the same thing, right? It's not being led. It's just like a survival of the fittest, right?
Yeah, and it's really going to affect your achievement as a coach and as a
Yep.
program, right? Because I remember doing, I got to go to a couple like athletic visits in high school before I got hurt, and I went to one school that I was really excited about, and none of the athletes liked each other, and the coach was
Yeah.
pretty hands off, and I went to
Yeah.
another school that I wasn't very excited about, and they all loved each other. If they were going to have a house party or whatever, it was just the thrower team, so they could keep an eye on
Yeah.
each other and make sure everybody was safe and did smart stuff, and I was like, this is a really great environment. Like this is somewhere where you go and you make good relationships and you don't have to worry about getting hurt or doing something dumb outside of the program. And it really shifted my mind about where I was interested in going because the first one was like my first choice and they were right off the table after the visit because I was like,
Yeah.
I don't want to just taste salt and vinegar for the rest of my life, like
Yeah. And a lot of that too, a lot of that is it all comes down to the details. And like with most of this stuff, the two things that are most important that you don't realize early on as a coach until you really get experience is that one, it's never a game of knowledge. It's always a game of execution. Everyone has all the knowledge in the world. It's an infinite amount of it, just, it's everywhere. You can learn everything you possibly could need to know because it all exists somewhere. It's a game of execution in that can you take that knowledge and apply it regularly, day in, day out, and apply it in a way that gets the result out of somebody, right? Because theoretically, everybody could be as strong as possible if they did everything perfectly every time. But like that's the hard thing, right? The actual practice. So that's like the biggest thing is it's an execution game. And then the details are way more important than you might think. It's not that the details make up it's only details, but it's like the details are important. It's exactly the difference between, like you said, like two programs, one where leadership feels absent and there's a lack of structure and a lack of, coherence in the team. The other is leadership is good enough and the team has a great vibe that creates a different scenario. Both of those groups, if they're relatively equal athletes, the one with a better environment is definitely going to do better. At the very least, they're going to be in a safer place overall at the end of their career than if you didn't.
Yeah, I could see a scenario where the super aggressive one, maybe they get one superstar out of it, or maybe they have some fire right away, like if we were testing versus every 3 months or something. But that's gonna flame out, and most people couldn't handle those kind of environments, or just super toxic. And
Yeah, you're gonna leave and be depressed for the next five
yeah,
years.
like
Yeah.
sure, there are a limited amount of people that are in training to win something, but the majority of humanity is not in that scenario. Like it's got to be in an environment where you want to be. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When
actually,
you're
hold on,
okay, yeah,
because
you
I
got
think
some
this. Yeah, we got to do the. I think it'll fit right here.
right here.
The Monroe's random ass question,
Okay,
which I did realize that I requested theme music.
and I
And
didn't provide it.
well, maybe it's going right now.
Beep bow doo 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 doo.
Okay,
Was that good?
Monroe's random
Was
ass
that nice?
There
question.
it is.
That song?
Okay, so I think I know what you guys would answer this, but I'm
Okay.
interested. Would you rather be twice as strong but half as intelligent?
Oh,
And I'll let you pick your strongest. So twice your strongest ever, but you got to be half as intelligent. And I don't really know how dumb that is. That's kind of a hard thing.
right.
So you just think of what half of intelligent, or the other way, twice as intelligent but half as strong,
Ooh,
which is pretty unstrong.
yeah.
Right now, at this point in my life, I would take twice as intelligent. Oh, for sure.
That's what I figured. But if you
Because
go back, like think of what twice as strong on all your lifts would be.
Yeah, all-time best. So you get to double your 600-pound front
You're
squat.
probably the best at
six,
most things.
I mean, I will say, like being twice at like a 600 plus kilo squat, like that would be pretty cool.
Uh-huh.
But it's also the kind of thing where it's like no one would care. Whereas like if you're twice as intelligent, I would have an IQ of like 103. You know,
You
like
feel-
I'd be smart enough
I'd
to
probably
like,
get my diploma.
I could finally get through my GED. Yeah. Like, so, I mean, that's a big deal. So, I mean, that would be the sad thing. What if you do pick one of them and they pick the intelligence and you get it and you suddenly realize how dumb you actually were because
Yeah, you just
you're only smart enough now to realize how stupid you actually were.
like you thought you'd be a world beater. Like I'm going to move
Yeah.
the world forward. I'm going
Yeah.
to,
Yep.
find a unified theory of everything for physics, and then
Yeah.
you get twice as smart. And you're like, oh
Yeah.
no.
Or you get so
Yeah.
smart that it ruins everything.
Yeah.
Maybe you
Yeah.
get so smart that you're like, I'm not wasting my fucking time with weightlifting AI.
Yeah. It could be that you get your super intelligent people probably are going to have a harder time, right? Because you're going to feel so out of place, right? Whereas being super strong, it's like it has no bearing on
And
anything
dumb.
else.
Like
Yeah, and
you
dumb.
nothing, you don't care
Yeah.
about anything.
I have kind of a funny story about this. I knew a guy for a little bit who was like world-class power athlete. I'm not going to say what sport or anything. I don't want to out him or whatever, but he had several offers to go to school kind of anywhere he wanted to and had to take the SAT like 11 times to get like a 700 so that he could
Ooh,
get into a college somewhere.
wow.
And you know, I'm gonna go with twice as strong.
That's a good, like, it's a
There you
good
go.
answer. Like
Yeah, 1,000-pound raw bench press.
if I was
and a-
twice as strong, I could
Yeah,
finally
yeah.
qualify for USAPL Nationals.
Finally,
Still probably lose. but
1,400-pound raw deadlift. That'd be pretty cool. I'd like that.
It's a good question, and it's like I would say you'd be if you've got a significant surplus of one or the other, you could just double that and be on like a level that no one has ever seen. Because like if you squat 250 pounds, being twice as strong is like not even noteworthy to
Uh-huh.
anyone else, right?
Yeah.
But if you're like, if you go from 140 IQ to 280, like you're like something the world's never experienced before, right?
Hmm.
So yeah.
it'd probably just be captured by the government.
I don't know if I'd be as good of a co-host if I had half the IQ.
Yeah, you'd be like you'd be like for the guy from
What IQ do you need to be able to speak? Am I still going to be over that? Like,
I don't even know.
it's just going to be like large ape noises.
I think if you're
we would
below a
just watch you
certain
we just watch
if
you
you're
lift. That'd be the
if you're
podcast.
if you're below a certain level, like you can't even be like registered for the military, I think. So like if you get below a certain like there's a threshold, there's a cutoff for the military even. So if you're below that, like you're not doing super hot.
I met some of those.
Yeah.
In the military.
I joined right after 9/11, so it was soon
Yeah.
after that.
They
So it
needed
wasn't.
people.
Yeah, they lowered those bars quite far.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're picking strength. It was hard for me because I was like, if I did strength, I besides like maybe an odd lift, like if you just doubled like your strict
Uh-huh.
barbell curl,
Right.
like that
That's
might
all it
be
is.
impressive. You know what I mean? But like,
You only double your strength and really useless. Like your side lateral raise goes up
Your
to,
pickle jar open?
yeah. It's like all these like pointless lifts that like you're twice as strong, but only in like external rotations of the shoulder.
well, I thought
Yeah,
about
you
it,
can do it.
I don't think
Yeah.
I have a world record. Like I
Oh
have
man.
decent strength, but I don't like I'm not half as strong as the best
Oh,
squatter.
yeah, yeah, I
I'm
got what you're
not
saying.
half as strong as the best deadlift,
Right.
you know? So it's like, but you would be almost as good at
Yeah, you'd be right
you know
there.
what I mean? Like,
Here, I have a follow-up question. Am I the same body? Like my body doesn't change at all?
are you asking if you just
It's
become twice as
Yeah,
large?
yeah, because here's kind of
it's
my concern, right? Is my best deadlift was like 3.5 times body weight. It's like 705 at 200, right? And so if I double that and I'm still 200 pounds, like is
Do you
that
just explode?
yeah, do I just explode? Like do my hands come apart? Like how does that
Like the last range
you're
question, we found out that Max
you
just
gain
killed everybody.
twice the strength, but you can only but every movement is now a body weight level of strength. So your deadlift's 1,400 pounds, but
That's your 1,400
you
pounds.
weigh 1,400 pounds.
Oh, okay. Is that impressive?
Both of those are extremely impressive. That's the
Yeah.
thing. It's
Just the
doubly
fact that you
impressive.
walked up to the platform in the 60 seconds
uh-huh.
at
Yeah,
400
And
is
then
yeah.
deadlifted
yeah.
1 times body weight.
Yeah.
That's a 2,800 pound
Uh,
stand up right there.
You would post it, you'd post on Instagram, and the first comment would be like, "Yeah, but look how big he is."
Yeah.
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 Right?
Like how
It's not
huge.
even that good because he's the same. He weighs that's only his body weight, even though it's
Yeah.
1,400 pounds.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you become like, when you're 1,400 pounds, is it just like around, or do I get to look like a
No.
stone giant?
No, you're not a good looking
It's not a good
1400.
14.
All the weight is gained, but it's mostly front to back. So like your back gets really long and your chest like so you're like really long. So it's actually really hard for you to get to the deadlift bar, but like you could do the strength. You could
Bench would
lift
be
the
great.
weight. You'd be great at the bench because the bar just touches your chest when you lower it, but like everything else is really hard to do. You can't get clothing that fits, but
Sets.
you're incredibly strong. Yeah.
Incredibly
You're not
strong.
even getting close. You're not even getting close with that. That's never happening again.
That's out of the question.
All right. Well, you can get back to your questions there.
Oh, back
I
to
felt like it was a
serious
perfect
questions.
spot right
It
there.
was. It was perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you.
And I'll go back to being quiet.
Okay. Um, Now I feel weird just jumping back into my little list of building rapport with people, but how like do you often have conversations with your athletes about like the kind of protective factors outside of the gym? Like do you talk to them about like being sure they go and see their friends every once in a while, like being nice to their wife or husband or whatever, you know? Do you ever have those
Um,
conversations or being extra mean, I guess? I don't know.
No, I mean, a lot of that, like, it just depends on the person. I mean, most of the better people I've worked with were just more mature. So it was like you didn't really have that concern. A lot of it was about like there's definitely athletes I worked with they just struggled to do normal shit, like make better choices about like don't take a nap today, go apply for jobs.
Right.
Don't go out and spend all night doing shit that's, gonna get you wrecked for the next morning and wonder why your workouts are shit. It's like, yeah, you have conversations about just like the whole aspect of being an athlete, which involves, hygiene and taking care of yourself outside the gym, doing the things outside the gym to accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish. It's hard to do that with people that have lives, when they have all kinds of stuff. Um, it's there's just a lot of that needs to be done as far as like making sure they're doing a good job with those things. And so, yeah, I think that's just a tough thing. You just have to make sure it happens. Have those conversations, but like everyone's different. It just depends where they're at in life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you could answer this as like a no comment, but it popped in my head. Have you ever had to cut somebody loose? Like
I
they
mean,
You're just like,
I've never like cut someone off and fired them, like gotten rid of somebody and said, hey, like I'm not going to coach you. Um, but there's been people where you just kind of like know it's going to end and you're just okay with that, where you're like, this person's just not doing the shit they should be doing.
Yeah.
And like they usually just fizzle out on their own. Um, yeah, it's rare. I mean, maybe over the years I've done it at some point, but it would have been, I never remember.
yeah. As a high school strength coach, there's like 4 a day that I would
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
cut
I
out.
can imagine.
That's one of I mostly teach like upper level math classes, but probably my favorite class to teach is the lowest level one that I teach because it's the last time that I get a lot of kids who like can use help. Like by the time they get to calculus, they're pretty much cruising already, but the lower levels like they need help, but then it's also stressful. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you take on a new person and you're like trying to get the process in place, do you have like a checklist, or are you like these are the three things that we're gonna do, like to that we talk about the first time we meet, or is it more like a interview that you do with them to kind of see where they're at? Like, how do you build the process of going from we've never met to we've got a plan together that we're gonna do?
Um, as far as like starting somebody off, I mean,
Yeah,
a lot of it just sitting down and talking to them about their goals, right? You want to get people to sort of open up about like what it is they want to try to do, what they are willing to sort of put into that. Because some people will come to you with like ridiculous ideas, like, oh, I want to be, I want to like break world records and win the Olympics or do whatever. And it's like, okay, well, let's like what have you done so far? You've never done a competition. Let's like start there. And so kind of like taking their interest and putting it into a real actionable like plan. So a lot of times you get people that are super excited about training, super excited about something. They come into the sport, they're ready to go. And then you have to say, okay, like let's figure out what it is that's going to get you to that level. And like we'll start at the first step, which is doing your first competition, building a training program that fixes your technique and gets you stronger. Um, so that's all just about like managing expectation. I really think that it's super important for a coach to right away. This is something you have to do very carefully. Is not shut someone down and say, hey, you're not going to do those, but also build their expectation and sort of like their desires around the short term, like what am I going to do today in the next week and the next month to get better, right? Don't build their whole thing up around like, oh, in 4 years you're going to win the world championships. That can be on the map, but it's like right now in order to get there you have to do these other things. So like establishing a sort of easy to follow, like we have distinct goals and distinct landmarks we have to get to, and these are based on what you want to do. If somebody's just kind of coming in to train or doing it as a secondary thing for whatever, then you have to just build up that sort of idea of like, what's the value in this? Why are we doing this? And get them to buy in.
yeah. Yeah, that probably helps a lot manage that kind of like you mentioned, right, in software you're trying to fail fast, right?
Yeah,
And in strength training the horizons are a little longer, right? Like you don't know really if you've done something great or something terrible sometimes for, a couple
yeah,
months, right? And
yeah,
so there is like
Yeah, and then just like the curve of once they get to a competition. So when I bring a kid to like USAPL Nationals, and it's the first time, normally like the kids that I bring to those probably won state. They were the Washington State champion. And then like some boys I took, they're super strong at their weight class, but then they get backstage and they're like on the fourth rack of their own weight class.
yeah.
Like
yeah,
they're not even winning their own rack. And then you're like, dude, this isn't even the strong kids. Like, and then you kind of watch like that come over them. It's like, like talking about tempering expectations. Like, this is going to take a little bit. There's a lot of people on this path already
Hmm.
that might be ahead of you.
Yeah.
So, and not a lot of people that I've seen like coming back from that. That's been the end of a lot of people's powerlifting careers, unfortunately,
yeah,
in my
yeah,
experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Do you have any great advice for tempering that? Like if you have an athlete who they realize they're on the fourth rack and you're like that seems like an important time for an intervention.
Yeah, and like because four days ago you were super hyped about how strong you were,
Right.
And then now nothing else changed. And now you're just tired of doing it. And they're kids, I don't know,
Yeah.
17 or
I
18
mean,
year olds, but
a lot of that too is about getting people to really focus on themselves
yeah,
more, like especially with young people. I can only imagine what it's like. You get online. Like when I started lifting, there wasn't even like there was no videos on the internet of lifting. There was a few websites where people uploaded stuff,
Hmm.
but like there was not the
AOL
exposure.
chat,
Yeah, I mean, there was not the
ASX local
exposure
squat.
to whatever like an infinite supply of incredibly strong, amazing lifting videos and advice and all this shit. So, you didn't have that, but now it's like got to be so rough for somebody who gets into this to be like, what's good, what's not good, like where should I be, what should I be focusing on? They just see like, oh shit, like, a 300 kilo squat at sub 200 body or sub 100 body weight is normal. So that's exceptionally good, right?
Normal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't realize that everybody that does that put it
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
you're seeing them all. Like that's it.
Yeah. And I think that creates a huge problem for people because they just compare way too much to other people when the reality is like you should be focused on getting athletes into these competitions and getting them to be solely interested in their own performances. Am I better at this meet than I was last meet? Am I better at doing the things I'm trying to do at this competition than I was last time? And that to me is so much more long-term sustainable thinking than anything else. If you're not doing that kind of stuff of like, we go to competitions to improve our own total, then you're just not going to be able to compete with anybody, right? Because you're going to just be trapped in this place of like, well, they're 50 kilos ahead of me in the squat. It's over.
Yeah.
To be fair, I've seen coaches that were, would be considered like, sort of internet famous coaches, that I've known that were the worst, the most toxic, just shit coaches when it comes to competition because they'd have a plan, they'd have an athlete who was extremely good, they're ready to win a competition, one missed squat, and they just fucking give up on everybody. They literally will just like throw the hands in the air, kind of not literally, but you can see that's what they're doing. Like, oh, that's over. We're not winning. And they just check out and it just
Yeah.
kills, deflates the whole thing. I've seen other coaches that are the kind of coaches that would like fight every single second to the fucking last minute, throwing every little trick they can possibly pull into every single scenario and take someone who wasn't going to win and they make a medal or something, right? Or someone who's really far back wins a bronze or a silver or whatever. It's like that coach never gave up on the vision.
Right. Because
And
you
they
don't
had
know
this,
that that could be,
yeah,
they might be in sixth. And it's
yeah,
like, well, third place is going to go for first. You know what I mean? Let's chip in.
totally.
Like, so
Yeah.
got to
It's
stay.
having that mentality of like there's always something we can be fighting for. Even if we're gonna die, like we're just gonna go out swinging, right? Versus the other one, which is like, oh, if we're not in the front, if we didn't win on the first, if the plan didn't go perfectly, it's over. Like that sucks. That's the worst. And I've seen that many times from very good coaches, you
We
know?
were at a state meet not that long ago, and the two favorites, like the dueling banjos or whatever of the heavyweight weight
Oh
class,
yeah.
they were 400 pounds ahead of everybody else in the weight class. One of them bombed on squat, and the other
Yeah.
bombed on deadlift. And so the
There you
dude
go.
who was in,
Yeah.
The dude that was a state champion had never, I think his total was like 1190, had never gotten over like fourth.
yeah, yeah, and he just
Yeah.
swooped in there because he was paying attention and doing what he needed to do, you know?
People will go to that and they'll cut that guy down by saying, well, they bombed out. And it's like I always see it as like, yeah, they took weights they could have lifted it, like they took the wrong weight. Like everybody, you could say that. Like you could ask for a 2,000 pound deadlift and bomb on it and be like, well, I bombed out in a deadlift.
Yeah.
But if I'd have lifted it, I would have won. It's like, no, it's like those guys chose weights they could not lift.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And granted, they could have easily won if they picked lighter numbers, but I always think that's like such a part of it, right? It's like saying like, oh, we would have won the Super Bowl, but we fumbled.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's part of the sport is not
Yeah.
doing that,
My
right?
kids get a little annoyed, but like my kids are, it's a classic thing. Like we always get our openers because I've seen kids
Yeah,
bomb out. And, right when I started the year, right before me, a kid bombed out and they would have
Yeah.
won a team state championship. But one of the kids bombed out because he was going for something a little heavier that he thought he can get, but he didn't get. So my big thing was always like it should be a heavy triple about your opener should be something that on a good day you could hit probably for 3,
And then like
somewhere
3 to
right in there.
6% an attempt
Yeah.
increases.
So
Yeah. Yeah, as a rule, we've definitely had things we've done the YOLOs for the title or whatever, and it's worked out pretty good on a few occasions, but that
yeah,
not
listen, it's
often.
your third attempt on a deadlift. That energy, it does. It
Yeah.
some people can lift some crazy things when they're going for a championship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um we talked about the accessibility of powerlifting and weightlifting coaches last time.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking about that a little, and I don't know if it's just because it's my feed, you know what I mean? Like I'm always looking for strength stuff, right? And so I've seen like a real rise over my career of training people. Like you mentioned James Smith earlier. I remember
Mhm.
reading his stuff 15 or 20 years ago or whatever, when he was publishing on. Is he still doing stuff? Is he still publishing?
He does like consulting now.
Oh, okay. Good for him.
Yeah.
Um, but now there's a expert under every stone, and I was just thinking about that for like the other sports that I've been in. Like I don't know that many great technical shot put coaches or great technical, wrestling coaches or whatever. Like, do you think that the rise of powerlifting and weightlifting, like that there's more good coaching, there's more good content? Do you think that's a reflection of like a cultural drive that people like to exercise and it's convenient and everything? Or do you think it's a reflection of like maybe the sports are a little less complicated than another sport? Like, what do you think is really driving the growth and the quality of powerlifting and weightlifting coaches?
I think it's two things. One, they're not that hard of sports. Like even weightlifting, the technical elements of weightlifting are not the same as like, complexity as like shot put,
Yeah.
right? Hammer throw. Those things are way beyond, they're quite a bit beyond what weightlifting is. There's a technical element for sure, but it's not dramatic. Um, with powerlifting, it's so accessible. I think it being popular is just a byproduct of lifting in general being a more popular thing to do now. It's just people see the gym and lifting as a way to do it. It's like the fact that there's so many like female athletes online posting videos of them lifting heavy probably draws a huge amount of people into it because when you realize like, oh, that girl, looks like me and she lifts weights and she's strong, like I want to be like that. So you get into it. Same with guys, right? You see some dude who's jacked, you're like, oh, like I'm going to do that. So the nature of more people coming in brings in more intelligent people as well, and just people that have a different outlook on it, right? Before lifting, 25, 30 years ago, lifting felt like it was way less about intelligence and much more like, I mean, if you read like West Side Barbell articles from
Uh-huh.
20, 25 years ago, they like sound insane. You're just like, this is like just rambling bullshit. Like there's like no citations. Like it's just like it's also like this is just like it sounds complicated in the intro, but like this really is like weird. Like where you think about it now, it's like people will talk about things in a much more just so much more well-educated point of view, right? They'll say, hey, here's evidence, here's some research, here's some practice, like this is what works. Whereas before it was just like, oh, I can just make claims and I have 800, you know, I have 17 800-pound squatters in my gym, never mentioning the fact that they're all in multiply equipment. But
And
then like talk
possibly
about
the
like,
kills.
yeah, talk about things that make it sound like it's like oh it's we do it's all math. We do 12 million pounds of barbell work or 12 million tons of volume or all these things. And you read those articles like, oh, this is like this guy must be a genius. Then as you get into things more, you start to realize like that was the highest quality information in some ways. Now it's just so different. You can see it like the principles of training are much more well understood now by a lot of people. So you don't need to look at a training program as a secret language.
Yeah.
You read training from a principled approach, which is to say, okay, when we read our training, we look at a program, where is fatigue management happening? What is this? What are the exercise selection? How does this apply? How does this transfer? Like you can look at a program from that lens, through that lens of principles, and immediately tell the quality of the program or what the program's going to do.
Uh-huh.
That kind of stuff is way more accessible. On top of that, you have a lot of money that comes into the sport, which just drives everything up. People are going to adopt whatever systems are best or whatever the meta of what training is, right? So if everyone's doing heavy singles and a bunch of back off sets, like that becomes the meta, and that's what everyone adopts right away, you know. Um, so you just gravitate to more of that because there's money there, because there's prestige and clout and all these things. So I think that the larger the reason for the success being there is, one, the sports are not as complex, there's lower barrier to entry, but also it's just so easy to disseminate good information that whenever something is good, it gets adopted really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, like you, so I mentioned before that our coach had the six filing cabinets that had everything in it from
Yeah.
1951 to 2003 or whatever. And one of the takeaways I got, as I got a little older is that like a lot of those, East German or West Side or whatever programs, they weren't really as much sports science as they were around the particular coach, right? Like that coach had an eye
Yes.
for training, and it was the particular way that they saw, like we were just talking about, they saw people get out from under a bar looking like they were going to die, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that was good. I'm going to do more of that." Right?
Yeah.
And so their system isn't really a system anyone else can do. Their system is Abajev, or it is Bondarchuk, or it is Louis
Yes.
Simmons, right? Not so much the principles as it is the person.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember there being a years ago, there was a guy, I just looked it up. There was a an author that was writing articles that called himself Dietrich Buchenholz. You remember this?
No.
And he would post things that were just like, it was just like this is like probably around 2008,
Yeah.
maybe earlier than that. It was just like a lot of stuff. It was probably even earlier than that. It was just like, again, it was one of those like sort of sounded like he was talking about like how the nervous system works, and like, we train this way to make the nervous system do that and this. And like when you're totally have no idea what's going on, you read that, you're like, this man's a genius.
Sounds great.
He's like cracked the code. And then you start to realize like this is just like a theory that's just totally insane. Like,
Uh-huh.
like I don't know if it's true or not. And it's like it's not really grounded in anything other than just like someone's way of explaining something. Abajay of the Bulgarians were like that.
Yeah.
Practice, like winning preceded knowing why they won,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Right, which is the way that it's supposed to be. Is that
Right.
like you have to get there, then you figure out, oh, how did that work? Why did that work? And that's always been the case in sports performance. Is like it will always come from the people who execute first. Then we learn why that happens, why that works, right? Ronnie Coleman didn't know anything of that. Ronnie Coleman knew nothing. I'm guessing that Mike Israetel knows, and Mike's a friend of mine. But it's like Ronnie Coleman won a bunch of Mr. Olympias.
Right.
Granted, genetics play a role as they do with every competitor. So it's like, does he just have better genetics? Probably to some degree, but like he found what worked for his genetics, and he excelled, right? You could go back and look at the trends of what are all of these guys doing. All bodybuilding training looks similar for a reason, because that's the thing that drives results. So when you get to these places where it's like, the kind of training knowledge that's out there in the beginning, it's like if it's all coming from theory first, it's generally not going to work in my mind. Like you're probably going to have problems.
Yeah.
It has to come from like, what is experience telling us? What do people do? Weightlifters and powerlifters do the lifts all the time. They train with a lot of volume. They train with a lot of frequency. Like those are the sort of cornerstones. There's deviations, but it's like you're not seeing anyone do like one time a month squatting and doing super well, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Outside of like the Willow Bridges, I guess, but different
Well,
world there.
yeah, speaking of being gassed to the gills,
Right.
one of the one of the things that I have a conversation with kids a lot about is, they'll be like, "Oh, this person did this and this person did this," and I'm like, "You got to understand that, training between 1960 and 1999, was pretty heavily motivated by things that we don't use and have access to and aren't going to be a part of our day." I've got a pet theory that steroids actually set back training by like a couple decades. That's been a
Yeah,
long standing argument of mine.
I would agree. I think that especially in like those countries that just never weaned off of it, like
Uh,
a lot of Eastern European training, like they just didn't they just lost a lot of creativity,
yeah,
because it's like, why would you bother trying to figure out a way to get 2% better at something by optimization and testing and learning, when it's like, oh, if we just spend all our resources on figuring out how to pass the drug test or figuring out how to just buy our way through it, like that's the problem. There it
Yeah.
is. Then we know really well how to train people to be stronger with drugs. So let's just do that.
I heard a story from an athlete who was telling me, so this is like fourth hand, right? Like it's a story from a story from a story from a story about, I want to say that it was somebody who was telling them that they were in the Bulgarian program, and for a while it was like an extra tablet of D-ball every week was there was
No, 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 no. The stories, I have firsthand stories of this
okay, excellent,
from the
excellent.
actual
Yeah,
guys.
yeah. Yeah,
So Abajev sat down with me one time. I was talking to him, and he was like, "This is the system of how they would take drugs in Bulgaria." He's like, and this is like to give you an example of how rudimentary this is. Anyone who knows anything about, use of anabolics, like, would just laugh at this. But the protocol was like, on day one, you take one pill, and then it it goes out of your body the next day. But day two, you take two pills, and then one pill goes out, and one pill stays, and then you take three the next. And like this was his logic, his reasoning. Little did it was like, it's like, why don't you just take an adequate amount to build up in your system inside your body, and then you have the, whatever inside your bloodstream. And besides that, like, taking one pill will still end up in your bloodstream. It doesn't just go out of your body, right? And also, why wouldn't two just leave your body if you
At the
took
same
two,
time, yeah.
right?
Why does one hang out?
Yeah, they wait in line, right? So that was his thing. And he's like, then you just keep going up until you take 30 a day, and then you come back down. And it was like, okay, like that was like an old school pyramid way of taking steroids. Like nobody would do that now. They would just be like, you just take the dose you're taking for the time you're taking it, right? Um, and so like there was a lot of stuff like that where it's like there was an old story I heard from some old time coaches in the US that would say like back in the day, this is probably the 60s, 70s, right? They would have like D-ball in a jar, like a bowl on the counter in the gym for like five, a couple cents a pill, 5 cents a pill or something. And this one guy, he's like, my method is I keep adding another pill every day until I check my stool, and until I see
What?
little blue flecks, then I back off one or two. So I know I'm topped up the right amount.
so he's
Um,
digesting the cellulose of the
yeah, I mean, I have no idea if that's even just bullshit. Probably just more him just being a
yeah,
bullshitter.
he's
But
just
I
messing
see
with
a
you.
part of my liver come out.
yeah,
Back it off.
yeah. I mean, some of those guys, they were saying they were taking like 200 milligrams a day of Danabol,
Yeah.
which is that's a lot. That's a lot of drugs, and that's a lot on your kidney, your liver. Like that's just rough. And your blood pressure is a problem, right? Your blood pressure will climb super high, and then that just wreaks havoc on your kidneys. So there's a lot of those stories you hear that are just insane.
Yeah.
But even more crazy shit. Like we heard stories about guys from like West Side that would someone told me a story about a guy at West Side. I don't even know how he would have done this, but I guess he took an entire like 10 like 5 or 10 cc vial of testosterone and injected the entire thing into himself in one sitting, which who knows how much, if it was, if that's a gram of testosterone, or if it was like cypionate and it's like 3 grams of testosterone in one sitting. Um, but yeah, it's like you can imagine it's the just low IQ people that are just they're fucking down to do whatever. Like I heard a great story. I could go on and on about these stories. There's so many fucking hilarious stories about this stuff, but like just like crazy shit people would do. And it's like you have to imagine like there was a guy I talked to once who was years and years earlier, he was caught in the Navy for importing steroids. And he told me he was doing a strongman competition and he was competing against Yoko Ohola. Remember him?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it
Phenomenally
was a
explosive strong man. Really
yeah,
impressive guy.
it was like a 300 kilo deadlift for reps, and you had 3 minutes to do it. And this guy got 12 reps with it. And he said, I was taking, he told me the story. He's like, because I was getting all the drugs from South Africa and it was just like cost nothing. So he said, I was taking 10 Anadrol a day, which is an extraordinary amount because most people were taking like a half or one of these pills a day, right? And he was like, he told some crazy stories about how his health deteriorated, but he was like, I was taking 10 a day when I did that, and I got 12 reps. And Yoko Holo did it for 3 minutes straight. He just didn't stop pulling. And it was just like crazy shit. You're just like, yeah, it's the nutty stories about guys taking extraordinary amounts of drugs, right? I mean, you hear these all the time, like with everything, with narcotics too. Like people talk about there was, famous people be like, doing multiple grams of cocaine a day, every day,
Yeah,
right?
wasn't Rush Limbaugh going through like 30,000 pills a month or something like that?
Right, right.
Make it in
I knew
something
it. We
crazy.
did we've done podcasts with guys that were like, like tier one operators in the military that were like addicted to Vicodin, taking 90 pills a day.
Yeah.
Like, and you're just like, the human body is extraordinary, but like, yeah, there's a difference. There's different worlds, right? It's like one thing if you get people that are, taking a little bit of one drug or another, the dramatic change from not taking drugs to taking drugs is insane. But from taking a little bit of drugs to taking who knows what the fuck people have done, right? It's like who's the if you could like zoom out and like you ask the question like, okay, who took the most drugs? Like who's the guy, right? Was the person. It's unfortunately it's probably some dude who's never done anything impressive because he just kept taking more and more, right? And it's like, he's
He's
on
still squatting 375.
yeah,
But he's got
Yeah.
a hoof.
yeah, taking 8 grams of testosterone a week and he squats 405 and it's high. It's like slightly high. It's like tough at the bottom, versus like somebody who like, whatever, takes creatine and he's, doing 650 squat, week 5 of his training.
I love that it's
Um,
slightly high.
Slightly high.
yeah,
Fucking almost there, but he never can commit
that,
to get that
that's the
extra
point, right?
inch.
No matter how much he takes, he never has the confidence either. Like he could do it. His body could do it, but his body's writing checks that his ego can't cash.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend who was, yeah, well, I'm trying to think about how much detail to give. He was in a college football program in the 80s, and he didn't
Perfect.
he didn't he didn't even know that he was taking steroids. At the end
Yeah,
of every workout, they would just give them a cup that were like, "These are your vitamins," and
yeah,
then he went to the doctor at one point after he finished his football career and was like, I got these problems," and they were like, and the doctor was like, "That's weird. Did you ever take steroids?" He's like, "I don't know. I don't think so." He's like, "Well, why don't we do some blood work?" And it's like, "You definitely took a lot of steroids."
yeah. Yeah, I mean that was happening in like Eastern Europe, right?
Yeah.
They would like people ask these questions a lot in weightlifting, where they're like, "Do you think they're taking drugs?" And a lot of times the answer is like, "I think that those people don't think they're taking drugs, but they probably are." Like the story was that like they would in Russia they would start kids like girls would start at 11 and boys would start at 13, and they would like basically like, "Okay, here's your 300 Dianabol pills, like take one a day." Like, and that's like that was the method. And in some places it was even earlier,
Yeah.
you just have to imagine a lot of these places are like there's just it's different than it's culturally very different than here. I imagine in a place like you go to any of these places though and think about it, like a coach has a ton of incentive to make an athlete great because they get a bunch of clout, they might get more money, they might all these things. So if they go and take their kid and sauce them up a little bit and they win some competitions, like that's a big deal. So
Right.
there's incentive everywhere for it to happen. The other side is like, my friend told me in Bulgaria, in high school in Bulgaria, all the kids would take steroids because they're just like they knew that that's going to make them stronger and they look better. It's like they just did it, and that happens here all the time
Uh-huh.
for sure. High school kids, like it's just like there's a pill that makes you stronger and jacked, and like why wouldn't they try these things, right? But yeah, I think there's a lot of cases like that where there's probably a lot of athletes that don't know they're actually being
Yeah, or
doped.
you might remember from like the era where we started lifting, they sold what do they call them? Pro hormones. They were
Yeah,
and marketed as the precursors. They're all the building blocks
yeah.
your body needs for anabolic
Your
activity.
body needs.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And then you find out 15 years later they're just anabolics that aren't on the
Yeah.
testing list. Like they're
yeah,
just
that are like way
And
worse and more toxic because they're just like, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. There was a drug called methyltrianolone, which was like a methylated form of trenbolone, and it was like super toxic. It was just passing through your liver, and like there's a lot of that shit where it's like, there's all these like just weird things out there. People will take.
Yeah, I had a good buddy who was taking the pro hormones. He's like, they're not illegal, they're
Yeah,
not steroids. I was like, do you want them? I can get them for you. And I remember looking at him and being like, dude, you look like you're made out of pizza. I don't think I'm gonna have
yeah, yeah,
that.
yeah.
I don't think this is
Right.
a good idea.
That
You can
was
tell
such
someone's
a
blood pressure's up from the outside. It's like, fuck,
yeah.
man, you need to calm down.
When you go to those like untested powerlifting meets and the guy bends over to put his head under the bar and has a nosebleed because of that, that's when you know you're like, this is the place to be. This is the true cutting edge of sports science.
Yeah. You got it figured out, dialed in. Yeah, it
Yeah.
always makes me sad too, especially when you see the, like younger guys or high school kids or something who are hopping on because I'm like, man, I've always been able to make progress just by having smarter training. Like I,
Yeah.
I've never gotten to the point where I did 2 rounds of training where I was making better choices and didn't get stronger, right? Like you probably could get a lot more mileage out of just, not training like an idiot,
Oh,
not having to worry about the problem,
100%.
you know?
Well, then just so many people take it way before they even approach any sort of actual
Uh-huh.
genetic
Yeah,
Yeah.
first plateau.
Yeah.
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 I think that the saddest part is that like or the most not saddest but the most confusing to me is the amount of information that's like instructive information on YouTube about taking drugs.
Yeah.
It's like I get the value of it is that people are going to do what they're going to do. Like I don't know if those
Right.
videos are inspiring somebody, but they definitely reduce the stigma because it's like, oh, here's a guy on YouTube who's famous who's telling us how to do drugs and what he would do and all these things. And the advice is probably fantastic, right? It's not even that. It's just that it's like a readily just normal conversation when the reality is like most people are probably gonna, you know, potentially have issues doing this, or who knows what kind of health conditions there are, or also it's like it's just not necessary to achieve better results initially, right? So yeah, I mean, this is like it's a different world for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, and it's always hard to tell, like we talked about before last time, you got to do the Dan Green or the John Hack, where
Yeah,
the only way to tell. But like, if you look at what people are doing, by weight class or for speed or any of those, what did Josh call them? GSC, grams, centimeters, and second sport.
Sports.
Um, if you look at what people do in those and you look for people who like have never failed a test, who performed phenomenally, who were never associated with a coach or a program that was known for, trying to get around things, the differences like in absolute performance between untested and tested aren't as remarkable as people think they are. Like
hmm
they definitely exist. Like it's not that it's that they aren't performance enhancing. It's just that you take a lot of risk and you kind of sign yourself up for something for life without realizing that, like, depending on the event or what it is that you're doing, it might be a percent or 4% or
yeah,
something, like it's not a huge outside of
yeah,
maybe bodybuilding, I
Well,
guess.
yeah,
Bodybuilding's probably the,
but then again,
yeah,
like, I feel like I would bet that almost definitely most people that start taking steroids for bodybuilding
uh-huh.
are probably wildly disappointed.
Yeah.
You know what I
yeah,
mean? 'Cause they think that all of a sudden they're going to look like someone on Instagram, and it's,
Yeah, that is a thing, right? Like if you look at Kai Green or Ronnie Coleman or Jay Cutler before they started doing steroids, they already would have been accused of being on steroids by
yeah.
everybody who met them, you know?
Yeah, I remember I saw an interview with Jay Cutler where he was like kind of just mentioning that he was like pretty strong. I think he said something like, I don't remember which it is, or maybe it was both, but he bench pressed 315 for reps as like in like eighth grade or something.
Uh-huh.
And like maybe he squatted like 700 pounds in high school. Like his
Yeah.
numbers were insane. Like he was a freak of nature from day,
right.
he is. So like, but he was kind of saying it just like, oh, it was like, yeah, like I was doing like 315 in eighth grade and I only do like 405 now for reps. Is like he was just making a point, but it was like just casually mentioning that is like absurd. And
Uh-huh.
there are definitely like there's probably kids now that could do that clean that have just great training as well. But this dude was just,
He just
he's
did
just
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
super strong, right?
It wasn't because he
Um,
got onto a training program at 6,
yeah,
Yeah.
and
yeah. But like you're not like going from being like a guy who like just started lifting at 22 to like, no real predisposition to it, and you're gonna suddenly become Mr. Olympia. Like those people are uniquely gifted for that.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are real health risks to taking steroids, and like Josh was saying, a lot of people are going to take them and be disappointed. Like I've
Yeah.
been in gyms long enough. I've seen people come up to me and be like, "I decided to hop on," and then like 3 months later, they're not any bigger or any stronger. They look terrible. You know, their face is all puffy and they're got real bad acne, and it's like, man, I don't think that was a good choice for you. And then I've also met people who tried to cycle off, and like their system never re-normalizes. Like
Yeah.
they're just on TRT for the rest of their life
Yeah.
because they messed it up.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also the opposite. Like I've heard crazy stories of guys that were like nothing without them and then
Uh-huh.
like a god with it, right? Like we had a guy, a friend of ours out here who used to train with Kevin Levrone, and he was like, he would show up to the gym. He's like, he'd start make a comeback, and he'd be like, he just looked like shit. Like he was awful. And you're like, this guy is not getting into shape in 6 months. And he'd be like, within 2 months, he looked incredible. Like he
Yeah.
just would, and it was like he was a unique person, but like a little bit of drugs, and he just would instantly just grow into the thing. And same with like weightlifters. Like the story was always like Vardanyan was like
Uh-huh.
this like best lifter ever, but like everyone would talk about how weak he was without drugs. But then when he take drugs, he was like unstoppable. So like yeah, there's every single shade of the spectrum exists, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. My our coach told us about how he used to be a competitive bodybuilder in the 50s. And he was like, I went to, I think it was Mr. Nebraska in 1959 or 1960, and it was like it felt good. Everybody there was having a good time. I came back the next year and all the guys were like shooting each other up backstage, like 1961, and it was like
Yeah,
just the tide had turned, and he was
yeah,
like, I don't think this is for me anymore. And that was his last time,
yeah.
doing a bodybuilding show.
I asked a really, really good coach out here, a very old guy, old timer. I was like, when did you know you wanted to be a coach? He's like, well, I went to the national championships and I came in last place and I was taken to Annabelle. So I realized it's time to be a coach.
I'm to be a coach.
So
That's good.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
really good.
yeah, yeah. Real good. All right. My last question on my list after our conversation yesterday, um, or not yesterday. Time doesn't exist for me. It's a construct.
yeah,
Um, so we talked a little bit about like the post competitive career blues that sometimes hits people. Do you think it's good to have another mountain to climb? Like I've heard that story so many times from people who are super successful, right? Like Mike Tyson famously, like I won the world heavyweight championship, and then I was like, what am I boxing for? You know? So
yeah.
how do you help people through that, or is that something that you see as like a necessity, or do you think it's okay to just have that kind of like little bit of blue period post competition and then
I
reevaluate?
think it's I think it's normal. I think now it's actually probably a lot better than it used to be because it used to be something where you'd like maybe win the Olympics or you'd win some giant thing and achieve your goal. And the next day you're like, okay, there's nothing for me now because there's no higher level to train for. And do I give a shit about doing another one or any of these things, right? But now I think it's very different because people along that journey on the way up, they start building businesses around themselves much, much more often.
Yeah,
And so it's like you're going to be good and you start building a brand and that brand then becomes your new challenge, which is how can I make more money, and the the double-edged sword of your life goal being making more money is that you can always keep making more money and you're never going to have enough.
yeah,
So like it's the ultimate challenge for people, which is unfortunate because it's, not that big of a deal in real life, once you have enough to sort of live. But like, I think that now it's probably easier because people can start to build little businesses around their fame, around their notoriety, and that starts to become a big thing. Whereas before it was a bigger problem. But I do think it's a huge issue. It's like as a coach or any of these people, it's like I've had that moment where I got somebody to have like the best performance. It was like every single lift exactly as we said, perfect perfect day, won everything, and you walk away from that like I don't know what there is because like I thought that was going to make me feel, I thought that was going to make me feel whole, and like that's the thing that I've been missing, and you realize it didn't have any effect on that. If anything, it made it worse because now the thing that you've been chasing, you realize you don't even care about catching it because you just did, and it wasn't the prize you thought it was going to be. So I think
yeah,
it's important. It's important that along the journey you one do it because of the journey and do it because you enjoy the act of doing it, but also always think about how can I make this into something else along the way and afterward? How can I build this into, if I'm going to be an athlete, I should either learn how to coach or learn how to do something in the sport so I can parlay this thing I have, this fame, this ability, this recognition into something bigger later on. If you don't do that and you just decide to walk away, that's fine. But like if you want to continue in the sport or any of these things, you have to assume there's always a next level. There's always something else, and it's got to be a change, a shift. Go from athlete to coach, go from coach to business person, all these things, right? I think that's super important to do. And when I had athletes that were good, I oftentimes I was always talking about like, hey, you should think about like what you're doing after this, right? Like this is going to end at some point. And as soon as it ends, you have to figure something out. So right now, plan on that. If that's coaching or it's whatever, if it's not, then that's great. Move on to your life. But like know when the end is there. Don't overstay your welcome. Then just get to the next level and keep moving on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioned something there that's really, really super important is the enjoying the process. Because when you're trying to compete at a high level, um, what you actually are spending most of your time doing is training. You're only a competitor a real minority of the time, right? Like if you are doing powerlifting or weightlifting, it might be 2 or 3 times a year that you're a competitor, right? The other 362 days, you're a trainer, right? Like you're
Yeah,
training. And
totally.
I think that, I really fell in love with training because of my sport, but I think that part of the reason I stuck with it is because when my sport was done, I could still just love training. Like it wasn't the thing that I was trying to compete in, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
yeah, yeah. So I think that sticking with the enjoying the process, leaning into the process is huge.
Yeah,
Huge, hugely huge.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my, my autism was all about like, I want to just know more about all this stuff. So like the details and the numbers, the training, like just grasping that was always interesting.
Hmm.
So I love the ability to like, how do you take that and do something else with it? How do you go into the next level? And so, yeah, you just kind of make logical jumps from this to the next thing. But I think that that's a tough thing, and it's hard for a lot of people, especially if you think about that on the smaller scale. Like a brand new person gets in, their Olympics might be a local competition. Like
Yeah.
that might be they've never competed in anything like that. They're just getting into this, and that's like a huge deal. And then they compete it and they do it and they are done. They're like, what's the next? Just do that again. It's like you have to kind of help to build people into that sort of like, yeah, well, like our goal here is the process of you getting as strong as you can get, and each competition's a way of testing that. But the training is about, it's about participation and discipline and health and all these things. And so it becomes bigger than just I went to the thing and I did it and I'm done and check that off the list. Now I do something else. So yeah, it's like it's tough. I mean, these are all things you have to consider when you're starting out.
Yeah. 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 The nice thing about and learning how to enjoy the process is that the process carries over. You can do it in almost
Yeah,
anything. It doesn't just have to be the weight room or
yeah,
the wrestling
100%.
mat or whatever, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good quality reps like these good quality shows we're doing. See how I fit
Yeah.
that in?